Elizabeth Lee's presentation. Again, a Commendation Award with a certain quality about it, in that it was morphing from one thing to another, and we felt that was part of kinetic aesthetics and kinetic design. So I'll pass the microphone to Elizabeth, and you explain where you coming from.
Great, thank you. So this is silverware, my morphable fork bracelet. So it started from this insight around travel utensils and disposable cutlery. We have a lot of disposable cutlery that we use, and it's highly polluting. It's really difficult to separate from recycling streams because it's too small. The problem isn't necessarily, it's not that it hasn't been solved yet. We know that there are regular silverware, there are travel utensils out there, but one of the user problems around those is such that you forget to bring them when you need them most. Mostly you don't leave your house in the morning thinking you're gonna go to a salad takeaway place and remember to bring a fork with you. Separately, I observed that people are taking things like forks, old antique silver plates, and bending it to form bracelets. They find them really interesting as aesthetic objects as well. So the question I sort of posed for myself is that could we make these items actually useful? These things that people clearly think are beautiful enough to wear as jewelry already, could they actually still be usable as forks? Exactly. So how is it a fully functional eating implement and this bracelet that provides you with ornamentation so you never forget it? So in looking at how we might do that, I was inspired by different types of transformable objects. So maybe you're familiar with the GIF in the center, these toys that use tension to connect beads together, and it either has strength and rigidity or it is flexible. There's more advanced materials science research has been done around this with these interlocking sort of chain mail units, where when they're in a certain configuration, and under pressure, they lock together and they are rigid. But when they're relaxed, they can move just like fabric. And maybe more pragmatically, you've probably assembled a tent before, and if not, I show you how it works. Basically, there are two interlocking pieces that fit together. They can move freely, but there's an elastic band on the interior that holds them together so that when they're assembled, they are completely rigid and unbendable. So looking at these mechanisms, I came up with a concept of a bracelet that turns into a fork when you apply tension to an internal ligature. So it transforms from something flexible to something stiff that you can eat with. Started thinking about how that might work in terms of the configuration. Those tent stakes kind of seem to be a really interesting option because they look like beads, which you already wear as jewelry. So the first version of this was actually these interlocking joints. I started prototyping that fit together almost like tent stakes, and there was a band in the middle that you pulled. And the clasp was similar to a sort of a buckle clasp, where the fork end fit into the end, and it had this gentle curve. After prototyping this, it was a good first step, but people found it difficult to assemble. Like once the pieces were disassembled and they were freely moving on the ligature, they were kind of difficult to then, or fiddly, not difficult, fiddly to kind of fit back together and pull tightly. So I started thinking about some alternate forms. So one alternate form is actually having a fixed pivot point somewhere holding those links together, and an off-center ligature that enables it so that the natural, there's a one-way direction built into the physical links, but then on one side when you pull the ligature, it also has 0 degrees of freedom. It can't move in either direction. So that's kind of what I pursued for the version that you can see in the other room. You can see in the render as well, but there's a 3D prototype that works. So as you can see, in its loose form, this end piece is screwed fully in. So it gives more length to the internal ligature. You can bend it around and connect the center tine to the end piece. And in its tension form, this end piece screws out, which applies more tension to the internal ligature, and it effectively prevents it from bending in the opposite direction. So it's not perfect yet. I had wanted to make a cast to a silver piece eventually. I'm still planning on doing that. But there's still some design kinks to be worked out with the concept. I think when I present to people, they're really intrigued by the object, but they still have questions about usability for actually eating with. So I think testing it and understanding how the shape fits within actually eating it and cleaning it, of course, is really important, as well as the assembly and motion and making sure that it's intuitive to use. There's some simple fixes I've already observed from prototyping this physical version around the ergonomics and the curve of the piece. Texturing would be really nice to make it easy to hold and not slip. And testing some of the tolerances with plastic and the strength is different, so I would move forward to looking at other metal materials. And other formats. I was just talking to JJ about making chopsticks as one alternative extension of this line, which could go into other pieces of silverware. So thank you.
Any questions?
I think this is wonderful. I guess this has got a very high-end sort of appeal to it as well. Like, kind of a bit confusing to people, which is big.
Yeah.
But maybe, I don't know, on an industrial design point of view, could we look at some like snap bracelets, that sort of thing?
Yeah, that was one of the early prototypes as well. I think the concern is like you really don't want it to unsnap when you're eating something and flick your food halfway across the room. But yeah, but something around that, almost like a two-way system, even if it was just a cam that uses that at the end. But yeah, really, really good thought as well. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Transformers. I mean, it's not where cars go into planes and things like that. And I think that's a fascinating idea, but to bring it into reality with a piece of jewellery and make it elegant as well is quite a nice concept. So thank you very much.